Hey man, this is Crystal Cycle Source Magazine's Grease and Gears Garage. Welcome to another episode of Roadshow. Today we're in Austin, Texas at my boy Xavier and Muriel's place, Providence Cycle Worx. Congratulations on the shop, my man.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
A lot of you guys will appreciate Xavier's arrival on the scene. I'm going to call it the arrival on the scene. Not the unveiling, not the, we're gonna go with some different words today. But you remember Xavier for, his over a decade as a rock and roll musician, touring the world and everything, but secretly, a lot of people didn't know, underneath the tour bus, motorcycle parts were being curried back and forth across the country to make projects in his off season. And, not that very long ago, he made the transition to do this as his full-time gig, and man's been coming out with some killer motorcycles. We're really lucky today. We're actually going to go through his shop here in Austin, and we're going to show you guys it's kind of an A to Z of, it's going to be a great segment for home shop guys, because this is like the A to Z of metal forming, metal shaping. We're going to start all the way with some simple hand tools and work all the way up to some of the more advanced tools.
Yeah. I mean, I think, when I started drumming, I didn't want to do the rudiments. I didn't want to learn the basics, the principles, and all that. I was the kid who wanted to play any Motley Crue song as fast as I could. And forget paradiddles, because who needs paradiddles? We just need to look cool and have a really big drum kit. And that's not the case with this, I've taken the advice and the expertise from a lot of guys in the industry who are my friends, who I look to for not only knowledge but inspiration, because deciding to go from one world that I have known my entire life to this world, which I've known my entire life as well, but not in it. I've always been around it, and now I'm in it. So having the ability to learn the basics and to understand the principles and where they came from, and then graduate to some of the bigger tools is highly recommended, because had I not took those lessons or called those guys up in the middle of the night and go, man, I can't get this thing to bend right. What's the problem? This is the problem. Oh.
Well, I think that's a real important part of the process too, is starting with the basic tools, starting with literally a piece of wood to bend something against, and understanding the way metal moves and the way you affect it from the ground up. By the time you get to English wheel planishing hammer, you what we'll discuss here later, you feel where the metal's going.
Absolutely. And back in the day, the old timers, the originals, didn't have that stuff now. They were bending it around wagon wheels or whatever had a curvature. Anything.
Using buzz boxes. Can you imagine going back to buzz boxes?
Yeah. Exactly.
And there's still guys I know.
And there's still guys who do it. And
parked right in their shop.
Again, those guys who were kind enough to take me under their wing and go, no, man, learn how to use a hammer and a dolly. Learn how to use a bead bag. Learn how to use mallets. Learn how to do it this way, then do it that way, because it makes the process a lot more understandable. Yeah. I was told in the beginning, it only does two things, man. It shrinks and it stretches. But when you get it past that point, it's not coming back, so, and again, I learn every time I pick something up, man. I always learn. And if I don't know, I'm not such a prideful man where I can't call up one of my brothers and go, hey dude, I'm freaking out over here. What do I do? And there hasn't been one time since I've made that transition. And that's a good word. I like that word, transition.
Yeah.
That I haven't been able to call on some people and get help, like yourself in many, many, many cases, and Billy Lane, Paul Cox, Aaron Green, Jeff Cochran,
You're
Ramsey.
pretty lucky with the library of
ridiculously
available to
and it's funny, I used to really be excited that my phone contact list had a lot of major rock stars. And I'm even more excited now because I have those rock stars in this industry that are guys that are like...
Well, and Aaron too. I mean, when you speak about metal shaping, metal forming, nobody... Like, Aaron's amazing.
Yeah.
The stuff that he makes is amazing. But what's even more incredible about that man is his ability to teach. Like,
yes.
You've had him on this program a few times, and
yes.
like he's done full tutorials on the English wheel. He's done full tutorials on the planishing hammer, and the way he delivers information.
He's an amazing teacher because he doesn't make you feel stupid.
Yep.
He's excited. He's like, and he makes it look so simple that it's almost frustrating. But when you get to that point where you break through of what he's trying to teach you and make you, because when I first got my machines, I had him on FaceTime, literally, and he was right there on my iPad, and I was rolling something, and he was like, no, that's going to get you that effect, but what's going to happen in the next 15 or 20 strokes is the ass end is going to do this, and it's going to be harder to correct that, so you want to do it. And absolutely amazing, and he was like, anytime, bro, just call me up, and I'm like,
and he loves it.
He
loves that.
And who does that?
You know, what a shame that there wasn't a capacity for him to be able to really, be an instructor. Have an opportunity to do that. So that's going to be cool. I mean, a lot of great little tips and tricks that we're going to pick up through that. And then in the later part of the hour, we're actually going to go to the finer details. Part of building incredible machinery is not necessarily what you can see, but it's what you don't see. Xavier has a great knack for the simplicity of the art of the motorcycle, and you're actually going to pass on to us some of your tips and tricks for that.
Yeah, and again, I'm not creating anything new. I'm just doing my own little thing that somebody had the grace to teach me and show me, hey, that's cool, but if you do it like this, you can get this desired effect. And I look at motorcycles and the whole application and how they're created and the flow of them and the symmetry and the idea and the use of negative space, which I learned from you. Like I do my music, my drumming. I was always a fan of John Bonham because John Bonham's idea of drumming was less is more. All the greats used to say, don't listen to what he's doing, listen to what he's not doing. Yeah. And I do the same thing. I love just like really beautiful, clean flow. And that's just me. And there's a lot of guys out there who are not like that, And that's the beautiful thing about motorcycles. And if you're a garage guy or a super builder or whatever it is, or you're the bolt-on guy or whatever it is you are, that's the beauty about motorcycles, is that it's such a personal thing.
So in the application of that, we're going to show you guys later on here everything from brake lines to wiring. We're going to show you some of the stuff that Xavier does with the Providence Cycle Worx bikes to hide that stuff. Some neat transitions from what you can see to what you can't, and the way he goes about achieving that. It's going to be a great show. Sit back, grab a cold drink, man. We're going to get ready for another episode of Roadshow.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you where I start my process with tanks or oil tanks or whatever it is, by using the basic forming tools, feed bag, mallets, hammer dolly, moving on to the English wheel, and then on to the planishing hammer. But all that, before any of that, you have to start with a template. And a template can be done on anything. I like to use a little bit more rigid of a piece of paper so it doesn't fold over. Some guys use chipboard. I know guys who use actual cardboard boxes because they like it to be really stiff. So whatever works for you. Some guys will use wax marker. Some guys use pencils. Some guys will even scribe it with a metal scribe. I use a Sharpie. And again, when you've actually determined that this is the size of or the shape that you're going to cut out of your piece of material, your metal, you already know that you're going to add however much you decide. I always add probably about a ½ inch because I tend to get a little excited on the planishing hammer, so I take off more than I need to. But whatever it is that you do, as far as the measurements that you have with your template, you will always want to give yourself, some extra room on the outside perimeter of it. Now, if it's a flat side, like this is going to be the side of a tank, don't go in the middle of it. You know, I was taught that if you have a piece of sheet metal that came from your wherever you get your metal, that a 90-degree side is always the best because it's already flat and straight, as opposed to using one that's got a cut on it. You don't know if that's straight. So I usually tend to go like this, and since I know that I'm going to add some material all the way around, I will just kind of judge it. Take your marker. And again, the more room you give yourself for removal of material, you don't have to do like 3 inches or anything like that, but the more room you give yourself for the removal of material and the possibility of maybe a slight mishap, maybe one of the filters goes on the planishing hammer and it does something erratic and it blows one side, you don't have to come all the way back and start over. You've given yourself in the beginning a little bit extra leeway. So there's your template, your piece, whatever it's 16, 18, or whatever the metal is, the thickness of your choice. And then some guys will use shears. Some guys will cut this out with their hands. Bandsaw. So whatever it is that you have in your shop that will work, and again, safety. Don't try setting up a portable bandsaw on something like this and trying to manipulate a piece of metal this size. It's not going to work. You're going to hurt yourself, and that's not what we want. So for me, the easiest and simplest way to keep from wasting material, which is what I don't like to do, and material costs money, you know, is I will take a set of hand shears, electric hand shears, and I will get as close to this as I possibly can, as close to it as I can, because I'm literally going to take this piece that I cut out, and I'm going to go over to my belt sander, and I'm going to get as close to the black line as I possibly can. Now, you can do it one of two ways. You could give yourself more area this side or more area on this side. It depends on what you want to do. I do it on this side because I know that this line, I'm going to do another scribe, a hard scribe, once I get over to the English wheel, to keep it in that same line, that same track, so I don't go over it, pull one side more than the other. So it all depends on you. But very important that when you do cut this, you are safe. So if you're using a bandsaw, don't use a portable bandsaw. I've seen too many guys try to do that and it doesn't wind up good for them. So either a set of hand shears, get some buddies to come over, trade places, doing it by hand, because that's how all the old timers did. You know, I heard one guy say that's why all those old timers have those big forearms, is because they've been doing this for years, and it's the truth. So whatever you do, just be safe about it. I woke up from a bad hangover, and I looked out my window at my parents' house again. There was a Harley sitting in my neighbor's front yard, and it was a 1977 slate gray AMF model shovelhead FXE. And I will never forget that day, because much like music, that was music to my ears, and I don't know why. I can't explain it. And he took off. I was having breakfast, and then I was in the garage with my dad, and he drove up, and I just went across the street and stared at it, and that was it. And I spent the next spring and summer just at his house every day. Oh, what does this do? What does that do? And how come it's called FXWG and DWG? And thank God for him. His name was Gary Pena, and he just literally started me on that path, you know, from where I left off with my brother and my father and with motorcycles. And I was downtown one night and I saw this guy's silver with magenta flames shovelhead FL and freaked out and stayed outside till he came out. And I asked him who he was, and he said him and his dad had a company that built custom Harleys. So I was working at a bar and shield during the day, and then I was moonlighting at night at a custom shop, and there was no there was no love there in the beginning, man. I was emptying trash. I was cleaning up oil. I was cleaning the toilet, because that old man, Richard Kurtzen, was not having it. I had to pay my dues. And then one day, finally, about 3 or 4 months later, he put a shovel head on the counter and laid out all the tools for me and said, I need you to take that apart. And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't know what I'm doing, because it's just nuts and bolts. So I proceeded to dismantle my first shovel, and then got into the real love of custom motorcycles. And by that time, the Chopperdom thing was huge, and the biker build-offs and the Discovery Channel, and it was a whole other world. But it was a really, really exciting time for motorcycles. So once you cut your piece out, and you've taken it over to your sander, and you've gotten it as close to your line as possible, then we move on to the sandbag. So the way I do my stuff, and again, when you do this more and more and more, you'll find what works for you. And again, don't be afraid to ask questions to guys who know how to do this stuff, because at one point in time, they didn't know how to do this either. So the only way we can get better at it is by wanting to gain more knowledge, and the only way we can do that is by asking questions, or by going to the major guys and taking classes. When I cut my templates out of, or when I cut my pattern out, I always leave material on the outside, which is why I have this arrow, because this will actually be where I take, once I cut this out, I will take this, my compass scribe, and I will go on this line once it's cut out and make another hard scribed line on the inside. That's going to be my guide for my English wheel, so that I know that not to get too close to that area, and then especially over the planishing hammer, so that I don't beat that material on the end so much that it becomes so small. Now again, I'm going to cut that off. In the end, I'm going to trim that excess off so that when my two materials meet for welding, they're as thick as they can be when they started. They haven't been compressed, and they haven't been planished out, and they haven't been hammered to paper thin, because then that's just not going to be any good in the end. So when I take this one and I make that hard line after this is cut out, what it'll do is it'll give me a perfect scribe all the way around of this outside edge on the inside. And if you want to get really like dead on, take some layout dye. Put a little layout dye on the side. That way when you scribe this through the layout dye into your metal, you can actually see it much better. Some guys don't do that. I do that sometimes, depending on whatever it is that I'm making. Then we move on to, not plugged in, but these are electric hand shears, nibblers if you will. And I will take these and I will cut this out, because I don't like to waste material. Material is money, and money doesn't grow on trees, contrary to popular belief. So I will take these out and I will get as close to this as possible. But then once I remove this from the actual piece, I'll take it over to the bandsaw, or I'll take it over to my belt sander, and I will round out all of this stuff, take off all the hard jagged edges, so that these 90s right here, and when I grab them, they won't, cut me. And I'll do not only the roundness of it, but I'll take all of the burrs from this by running on the belt sander on the round part of it. I'll run it like this, so that it just takes off all the burrs. It's just something smart to do, so you don't wind up cutting yourself, which I've done plenty of times. So recently I have acquired through a company called Woodward Fab, which is phenomenal, shameless plug, a rotary shear. And the rotary shear, what it does is, normally, if you're familiar with what a shear does, it will cut metal at a straight line with two blades. And some of them are made to do all the way up to super, super thickness, some are smaller. The rotary shear is a ratcheting type of shear that's throatless, meaning it has no end, but it cuts at an angle. So you can do round cuts instead of having to just do straight cuts. So you can grab one end, you can pull, and as you're pulling, guide the piece of material through the two wheels and cut a nice round with time, take your time. Cut a nice round curve at it, as opposed to trying to put it on a bandsaw with a straight blade and doing that, which is fine too if you have a gigantic bandsaw that will cut 16, 18, 14 gauge mild steel or whatever it is that you're working with. But that rotary shear is perfect because it does great curves, and it's small and it's portable, so I can move it anywhere in the shop if I need to, if it's in the way there. And I've cut, I believe, all the way up to 14-inch gauge, 14 gauge, which is pretty thick, which is what I make my seat pans out of and stuff like that. So, and then I met a guy at a karaoke bar who happened to be an amazing singer. Started playing music again with him. So I was doing motorcycles during the day, and I was playing rock and roll at night, And then I got the call to go back out to LA for the third time. And I remember telling the guitar player that was on the other end of the line, I was like, man, I'm happy that you have had success with that band with 2 records before it, and I'm sorry that it broke up, but I don't want to move out to LA, man. I'll die. I know I will. And little by little, I started thinking about it. And at that time, I was 33. I was getting ready to be 34. And I was about to move out to LA for the 3rd time. And nobody moves out to Los Angeles at 34 to become a rock star. Not unless you're severely out of your mind. Well, I was out of my mind. So I packed up everything, and that band turned out to be Buck Cherry. See how it's starting to take the curve. Because the center of my wheel is right where the contact point is where it's hitting and making that crown, this little line, this little scribe line right here, I'll get right up to it and just kind of kiss it so that it starts to do that form or take on that shape, just like that. You can see where my line is, and pull this down because this is actually starting to do this. Now, because it doesn't apply as much pressure as like a planishing hammer, you could go in and take a couple of these ripples off, and most of the guys, or some people, would go in with a stretcher or a shrinker, and they would pull this down in order to get rid of all this stuff, and then they would cut it off and they would planish it and make it all nice and smooth. I was told in the very, 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 very beginning that metal only does 2 things. It shrinks and it stretches. That's it. And aluminum is a whole other world, and I won't even get into that. And of course, the thing about all of this is it looks like crap when you first start out. And you think, how can that awful piece of bubbled, rippled, pancaked, potato chipped piece of metal wind up being an oil bag?
Well, the hardest thing I think to get you to talk about this for a second is to not, right off the bat, when you go to the beater bag and you have that in front of you, to not want to hurry to the point where it's smooth and nice, because
it is all a process, and you have to trust in the process, because in the end, if you beat it too much, if you make it too thin, you won't have enough strength and rigidity when you weld it. Then it's not going to do its purpose, which is either hold fuel or hold oil, and then you're getting into a whole other world after you've done body work and painting and all that stuff. So I was shown and taught all of the beauty and everything that we want to see at the end starts from the first cut, from the first template. and you lay it down and you start hitting it with the mallets and whatever it is that you're going to use, you know, patience is everything when it comes to this. Because yes, although it's metal and it shrinks and it stretches, when you get it to a certain point and it gets past that point, it's not coming back. And now you've wasted material, you've wasted man hours, your old lady screaming at you because you're going past lunchtime, etc., etc., etc. So, and even with those pound marks on it, you can feel it. It's pretty smooth, you know. But then once you get it on the planishing hammer and really, you know, you smooth out these edges, make this contour match this one, because there's a high spot here and a low spot here, so you can see where it does this. So that would have to be addressed. But like, you get the idea of the shape that it kind of, you know. And at one point in time, it was just a flat piece of steel, 16 gauge. So, you know, and it could be a top, could be a side, who knows. One thing that I was told was always know your tools. Know what they do, know what they can't do, and if you take care of your tools, they'll take care of you. Some guys don't, some guys do. I was raised to take care of your stuff and take pride in it, you know? Because at one point in time you didn't really have it. There's a million guys out there that would die to have stuff like this, so I always take that into consideration when I take care of my stuff and put it up. Always clean it. So I met Mr. Billy Lane. By a weird thing, we were playing a festival called Earth Day Birthday in Tampa, Florida. It was a huge festival at one of the baseball stadiums. And I was walking around like I normally do, you know, amongst the crowd, because people don't really recognize me. They recognize the singer, which I'm okay with. And one girl came up and she had one of our shirts, and she said, you know, can I get you to sign it? And I said, sure. And she went and got a Sharpie, and she turned around and I was going to sign it. I was like, who do I make it out to? And she said, make it out to Billy Lane. And I said, Billy Lane has a Choppers Inc.? And she said, yeah. Do you know him? I go, no, but do you? She said, well, he's a really good friend of my husband's. And I said, oh, let's get your husband on the phone. So we got her husband on the phone. I talked to him for a few minutes, and I told her husband to call Billy and give Billy my number. And Billy called me later that night, and we kind of talked, and I was like, hey man, you ever been on a tour bus before? And he was like, oh, I've never been on a tour bus. So I'm like, we're gonna be in your neck of the woods sometime in the next week. What do you think about coming out on the road with us? And he did. Packed up a suitcase, came out on the road, and I said, I'm not gonna tell anybody who you are. You're just a dude riding. I said, I'm gonna give you a radio and just walk around and be a normal dude. And he did, and that was it. That was the beginning of like our friendship. And myself and my guitar player, who was also a fan of his work and a bike guy as well, literally we'd fly down to Florida every once in a while and hang out with him and whatever. He asked me what I wanted. I said, I want a Choppers Inc. chopper. Chopper. Don't care about the motor. It's got to be, you know, a chopper, tank shift. And 2 months later, he sent me pictures of what would now be Maria, and I was out of my mind, man. I was like, holy shit, that thing is insane, you know. And that, along with the biker build-offs and the chopperdom and the Discovery channels, that was like the real thing that tripped something in my head about, you know, how do they do that? How does it come to be? Where does it get from here to here to here? So, this is a planishing hammer. Basically, what it says, it's a hammer that moves really, really fast, and where that one would rip your thumbs, this one will just plain crush them. But you never really get your digits under here like this, but you can't get close. These are interchangeable dies that have different crowns on them, and there's a whole bunch of them. They go all the way to flat, they go all the way to super, super high crown, And what that allows you to do is figure out what the curvature of the crown or the radius or whatever you want to call it that you want to put on whatever piece that you're hammering. And the thing about this is, like we said earlier, this moves at such a rapid rate and with such intensity that it will take this piece of metal, this thickness, and turn it into paper thin like that. So that's where solvent comes in. Some guys use WD-40, some guys use a mixture of kerosene and this and that. And so again, whatever's most comfortable for you or whatever you have in the shop. But this will allow you in a really quick form and in a quicker time to get that effect by crowning something and taking some of these waffle areas that aren't so nice and basically working your way around to the desired radius. Now, what this will also do as well as if you want, we talked about earlier about how this scribe mark is where I'm going to fold over or make my radius in order to meet my sides or my top or whatever this is. I don't remember if this is a top or a side, but to where the two sides will meet for welding purposes. And what this is also used for is if I was welding two pieces of metal together and I have that weld line, I go in here and I planish this out. Like if you're taking a set of fat bob tanks and you're splitting them in half and you're putting them together, that inside shell, before you do your tunnel and do that other stuff, you would come in like this and you would planish out those weld marks to make them nice and smooth. But again, if you do it too much, you take the purpose of the weld out, which is to connect two pieces of metal properly. If you pound it with this little thing, depending on what your crown is on that weld, it will shrink that weld and it will distort it, and it won't work. It'll take all the strength out of it. It'll remove the purpose of what you're doing it for in the first place. There's a lot of other guys out there that are metallurgists that have a much better notion of what this is molecularly made of and the compound and all that stuff, and that's a whole other world, man. I just know that if I put two pieces together and I weld it incorrectly, first of all, my process and my prep is not right. When I get to this, it's going to make it even worse. Therefore, at the end of the time, when you're riding your motorcycle and you're going down the road and you see that little bubble that pops up on your gas tank under the paint, that's because of this and a lot of other reasons. But this is where it starts at. So this is basically that quicker, more of a tight spot, whereas that one has a pretty big path on it. This is a little bit tighter. So this is the actual 2 points between this flat spot and that metal part and all the surrounding areas where you can manipulate and turn it and make it curve the way you want. And the other thing is, really important, this thing is loud. Most of them are, so we'll get to it. And the other thing too is it's all about pressure. This one exactly like the English wheel has an amount of pressure that I can put on this thing. And when this thing goes da-da-da-da-da, I don't know how many times it does, but it does it a lot. If there's too much pressure placed here, as well as the pounding force of the actual hammer and the die and all that, it will take your metal and just flatten it out, and you can actually hear the metal getting thinner. So you got to kind of be careful. And again, all this stuff is all, it's all hands-on. You gotta do it a couple of times and screw it up before you realize what's going on. And again, just to show you real quick, I can actually use this as a metal forming piece of machinery. There's two, metal shaping, metal forming. I can actually, while I'm using the planishing hammer, I can pull this down to make that shape. But see, when you get to this edge, it gets really thin, so that's where the scribe line comes in order for you to give yourself enough meat and material so that this isn't your weld spot that's thin, this is. Or where your bend is, and giving yourself enough of extra material so that when you do roll it over, you have a good amount of thickness of weld to weld, not thin. right there, I'm getting a little bit too hard on it. So you can hear the machine kind of going, ah, so I don't want to, the machine will take it, the metal won't. That. You can, I mean, obviously, the more you work at it, the more you can finite it, but that's what a planishing hammer will do. And this is the one side that we used as to roll it down while we were pulling it, and this is the side that I didn't. So you can clearly see the difference in being able to take a die like that, or whatever die radius that you have, and either maintain this angle or pull it down while it's hammering and do this with it. And again, the smoother you can make all this, the end process for your body guy or your paint guy is much better, which relates to less money you have to pay them for labor hours of body work, and less bondo and less material and all that crap, weight. So trying to get it as close to perfect and smooth at this stage. And this is just a piece of rust. I mean, this still has mill scale on it. So ordinarily, if I was going to do something where I was really going to take this to the end process, and I could take all this down with a flap wheel or whatever, but it would be a brand new piece, clean, not etched in any way, shape, or form. And that's pretty much the process. So that could be a top, you know, or a side, however you wanted to do it. You know, but that gives you an idea of what just those two machines can do, you know. And again, all the guys that I've ever known didn't have this in the beginning, you know. They didn't have planishing hammers and that. They did everything with these. And that was the other thing, is like I said, and I'll show you real fast, like, if you look at the radius on these, see this one's fatter and has a little bit of a curve to it. This one's thinner and is flat. And this one has a massive curve. So these slap hammers that are leather are much less destructive on steel than using like a hammer and dolly, or even a hammer with this. Now there's applications for both of those, but I like using these because I can hit it, kind of feels like a drumstick, but I don't do as much damage. If I do, I can go back and fix my screw up. So I'll show you how this thing works. So this is the side that we did with the planishing hammer. So you can see that if you, I don't know if you can, but there's thinner pieces that are flattened out. Not only are they waffle and paper or potato chips, but they're actually squished, so you can see how thin that got. This hasn't been affected at all. So in order to get maybe a small curve like this, instead of using a planishing hammer and being in a hurry and not getting it right or screwing it up, I can use, you know, the T-dolly. And this basically does the same thing. So if you're looking at it from this angle, at this T-dolly, which is basically it's just a piece of steel that's round that you use this or other hammers to shape whatever metal you are around this curvature, you could go back, because we have a scribe line, and you could go back and really get it tight, because we're gonna cut all this off anyways, this excess. But since this has been done on the planishing hammer, and this is actually hasn't been touched at all these T-dollies come in various diameters. They come in smaller ones than this, and they come in big fat ones in order for you to achieve whatever kind of curvature you're looking at. But it's super simple. You take this and you just kind of, and you can feel when the metal hits, when the metal underneath makes contact, or the metal in between makes contact with this metal underneath and this leather piece. You can actually feel the metal shaping. And in time, you can get the same effect without that really thinning of the tip of the metal. Now, just for time purposes, this was done quickly, but you can actually take a flat hammer and get your first one done go all the way down, and then take one of these, and really, because of the leather is a lot more forgiving than metal on metal, the leather will actually just kind of shape it right, because this is what we're looking for. We're not worried about this. We're looking for this nice little round right there that doesn't have beat marks and potato chips. And you can get the same effect with that depending on what diameter. And this does take longer. It takes a lot longer, but it's a lot more precise, especially for guys like me that are beginners, because with that machine I get excited and I have had too much coffee, and next thing you know, I got to cut my tank back an inch more than I wanted to, because that's the big thing about this. Once again, the end result is affected way in the beginning by prep, way in the beginning by giving yourself just enough meat. And there's tons of tutorials out there on guys that are just ridiculous. They do this stuff in their sleep and are absolutely amazing. Some guys will go a full inch and a half, full inch and a quarter, so that they don't have to worry about, oh man, I got too close, what am I going to do now? Now I got to shave, now I got to trim. And then it messes up all their ideas and how they wanted to do it. So, you know, just take your time and enjoy it. It's fun. So, we talked a little bit earlier about the way I like to run wiring brake lines through my frames for the sheer fact of cleanliness. And again, all this stuff is personal. You don't have to. Some guys hate it. Some guys think it's a pain in the ass. Yes, it is a pain in the ass. But I like it because I like to have smooth. I like it to be clean, man. And the way I like to do it, and there's a bunch of ways to do it, and because we don't have a frame, we're not actually doing one. I'm going to demonstrate it on this piece of pipe. And it all starts off with one thing, well, maybe two things. Mock up, mock up, mock up. When you're doing, say, forward controls, brake lines going through the front of your frame at the first bend, all the way to the back to a brake caliper, or maybe it's coming out midway that goes into a brake switch, or maybe you have the brake switch that's at the master cylinder. There's tons and tons of ways to do it. You always want to do it in your mock-up stage, because you do not want to do this after the fact. And there's a reason for that, is because I found out that it's a pain. So you want to do like anything else when you mock up a motorcycle, whether you're doing a tank or an engine or whatever. Always do everything in mock up. Have everything, as many parts on the motorcycle as possible, so that there is less of a chance of a screw up or a miscalculation or a mismeasurement or whatever that is. So I always like to have the full mock up as best as possible. Go in with a Sharpie, take a piece of line or a piece of wire, and run it from whatever you're coming off of, whether it's the brake light switch, the master cylinder, whatever, and have that so you can visually see it, because that's what it's going to look like in its end result. So you may think that from this point at the end of the master cylinder to where the wire leads into the frame is X amount of space, but you didn't take in account for the banjo fitting, the bolt, and then you're off by an inch. Then what are you going to do? So again, it's always really important to do it in the beginning, because you can erase this Sharpie off of a blasted frame, but you don't really want to go drill another hole in a powder-coated or painted frame. So the first thing you want to do is get everything in your mock-up. Brake calipers on your brake caliper mount, whether your stay's there or not, make sure it is so that you can swing everything the way that you want it, so it's all positioned to where the motorcycle is going to be in its final assembly after paint, etc., etc. Again, take the extra time in the beginning, saves yourself a lot of headache in the end. And the first thing I like to do is, once I've set it all up and I have an idea of where I want to run my brake lines or my wires or both, Sharpie, pipe, is to just make a little dot. So that way you have an idea of where that wire or brake line or both is going to go through. Now, once you've done that and you've actually gone through the entire bike and have labeled on the pipe an arrow for the line to go in this way because the line is going to go back this way, or vice versa, you have an idea of how you are going to clean up that hole when you drill it and at what angle. Because you can make a 90 hole, and then what's going to happen, even if you put go in there with a deburring tool or whether you use a bit, some guys use these and I don't like to use them because they get caught up and they make more burrs and jags than you really need, but again, up to you. I will go in and I will literally take the drill bit or the deburring tool, clean all that out first, and then lay it, like literally counter it, but lay the bit inward at an angle so that when you go in, this wire won't be at a 90. It will go in like this so that there's less abrasion. There's less possibilities for abrasion, burrs, and all that. This wire will lay in a little valley. Depending on how many wires you have and or brake lines, shrink wrap, huge important, huge, will determine the size of your hole. Now, some guys prefer not to use any of that and use traditional brake lines with traditional fittings and a traditional banjo bolt and run it all on the outside, which is absolutely fine as well. I know fellas that actually will make the custom lines made by a bunch of different companies. There's Goodrich, there's Russell, there's Magnum, where they will run they'll run all of their wires through the frame first. So you have a bare frame after it's been disassembled from mock-up with a bunch of wiring sticking out and brake lines. That's the way to do it, because that way you know everything has been done properly. Now you have to pull it all out when you go to do paint or powder coat, but you know that you've given yourself at the exit end of your frame 2.5 extra feet of brake line and or wiring. So back to the initial. Depending on how many wires you have will determine the size of your hole. You can't go sticking a brake line 3 or 4 wires that are either brake light switch, brake light, tail light, whatever, that much, then you shrink it and stick it through a 1/4 inch hole. It's not going to happen. So therefore, if you misjudge again, once you've done paint and powder coat, if you're lucky, you might be able to get in there with a drill bit and open it up, but you don't want to chance that because now you're screwing up your paint and your powder coat. So the best thing to do, the thing that I found that works for me, is once you make your first initial marks all the way around the frame, then you know exactly written, you can write it down or you can take a piece of paper. When I get multiple things, like on Grace when I did the hydraulic clutch and then I did the brake, the foot brake, and then I did the master cylinder up top, I literally wrote on the frame what was going through here. So that way I knew how many wires, because in the midst of a build, things happen, things change. You go on vacation, something didn't get ordered, you forget things. So either write it on the actual frame or make a number 1, and write it on a piece of paper. That's going to have both brake light switches, a brake line, etc., so that you know where to pick up when you left off. So that being said, you know exactly how many wires are going through, you know the entrance location, you know the exit location. And again, if you're running a traditional brake light switch that has to have a T with an entrance and exit and an actual brake light switch that goes on it with your 2 spade connectors or your Phillips, whatever it is, you know that you have to have an entrance point, you have to have an exit point, your brake stay or your brake line T, and then another entrance point, and then another exit point for your brake caliper or calipers. So all that has to be done way in the beginning. So now you figured out how many wires are going through, where the entrance and the exit location of said wires are going to happen. Center punch. I like the one with the spring on it. A couple of times. You go in and you make your first pilot hole. Now, I like to do this after dismantled, so that everything gets drilled once, it gets deburred once, and you can go off your checklist. Then you can move on, obviously, to whatever else is going on. We had just finished the 15 cycle, the record cycle, which we were out on the road for almost 25 months on that record. Because I remember Keith going, we're not going home till it goes platinum. Because we were at 980,000 units certified. And we said, okay. And as soon as it went platinum, we finished up the tour. We went to LA, we dropped our stuff off, and then Billy was like, your bike's done. So he said, cool, let's fly to Florida and we'll drive your bike, his 65 Panhead and Billy's 36 across the country. And that's what we did. There was points in that trip that were so monumental that I really feel and I believe that that's where I understood what the creative process of a motorcycle was about. Not so much just the welding and the fabrication and the paint and all that stuff, but like that feeling you get when you get on it after it's been an idea or sitting on a lift for a while and getting lost and getting found at the same time, you know, looking over and hearing that hum and your buddies. And at one point in time, we were on Route 66 and we were 3 wide, and I didn't hear anything but, and I remember thinking, hey bro, you gotta pay attention, because what if a rabbit jumps out or a turtle or something like that? So, but that's when I realized, you know, I got that full circle thing of like, oh, this is what it's all about. Always do a pilot hole first. And some people will use a step drill for this, or step bit. I kind of tend not to use them because although it allows you to do a much bigger hole consecutively from smaller to larger, the problem with the step bit that I found is that it leaves a lot of fragment and a lot of burring underneath, whereas if you're only doing one bit at a time, and again, yes, it's much more time consuming, but it's a lot cleaner because you want the end effect to be clean. So this is a step bit. So you can see it has multiple steps on it where you can go in and you can do quarter to blah 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 on and out, on and out. But I found that when you use these, the inside gets rolled over a bunch of times and it leaves a lot of fragments. And again, what we don't want is this wire going in, and because it is a Harley or what a Honda, whatever it is you're doing, is going to vibrate. If there's anything that catches this over time, and it may not be a week, it may not be a month, it may be a year, it will cut its way through. It's just the way it does. So you can use this, but just make sure you deburr. Now, a lot of guys will also use one of these. This is called a countersink bit. And what this does, a countersink bit, what this does, you can see it's a little diamond. It will actually take the 90 of the hole and transition it out. It will countersink it, just like it sounds, which is a great bit to use. And then do the other process as well. So let's say that now we just went to a quarter. If you were running maybe one line through it, moves easily, right? Okay, but since we're going to be running multiples, which I've always found that's the case, very rarely have I ever run one line. Okay, so now, a little smoky there. Now we've gone all the way up to 3/8. So you can see that 2 wires, which would be a red black, say we're doing a brake light switch, goes in Nice and easy. So then now, since we have our arrow pointing that way, what we want to do is we kind of want to make a valley right here. You can take your countersink bit and just do this, and already there's a nice little lay down like that, where this side is still kind of up, but since the wires are being pulled from this direction, or actually it would be this direction because I'm doing it in reverse, sorry, then it will lay like that. But if you wanted to do it to where you would absolutely not have a difficulty, and there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can go like this. And actually bring the bit down as you're turning it, little by little. And now, instead of having a round hole, you have an oblong hole with a slight ramp, if you will, that will sit in perfectly. And you can still go back in with your deburr tool on the inside. And this thing is cool because it has replaceable tips. And I highly suggest you get one of these, because what it is, it's a blade only on one side and in a swivel. So like if I was doing this pipe, and anytime you cut, you want that so that you keep the jagged edges off, you don't cut yourself. And again, if you're using any kind of wire, any kind of brake line, it's not going to screw it up. Now, the beautiful thing about doing all of this prep work beforehand is that when you go in to do paint or powder coat, all of this is going to get laid down. There'll be primer. The powder coat will actually fill in all those little gaps, and it will actually make its own type of barrier between your shrink-wrapped wires or brake line and the actual cut into the metal. So it kind of, imagine like paint literally just melting into it and covering all the sharp, jaggedy parts. So now we have the entrance. And you've figured out what you want to do as far as your exits and all that stuff. Again, I like to use this type of brake line. It's made by Russell or Goodrich. Goodrich. It's called a Sniper 2 system. And you can see where the actual diameter of a normal one, the two difference in sizes. Now again, you can make a hole big enough to run one of these if you're going to make a do-it-yourself brake line, which is totally fine. Or if you use one of these with no problem. So now, when you look at your motorcycle, you have the inlet of your brake line, and say you have a couple of different wires for whatever. And your wires should always be shrink wrapped. The brake line, probably not. I don't, because of the fact that if there is an issue with it, you can trace it back out and reinstall it. Now the thing about these that's cool is they come with a multitude of different fittings. So they have a 35, a 90, and a straight. This is a 90, this is a straight, they make a 35. But this little bad boy goes on the end of this. Well, you can see it goes on the end of that. Then this is not only threaded here, but also threaded at the top. And what happens is this screws into this while this is compressing around the brake line. So now you have this. And what this allows you to do is run brake line in a multitude of directions, however you want to. But, and this is very important, before you go in final assembly, you want to run all these through, once again like we talked about before, but you want to make sure that these are clear. Because when you start to cut these, the pieces of plastic and the pieces of fragment of the braided steel around it can get inside and it's a really small inner diameter. So you want to make sure that these are blown clear. I like to take it and have air on one side and listen to it. And then I will literally blow on it just to make sure, because you don't want to get all of this done. Go to final assembly, make your ends, hook it up to your brake caliper, hook it up to your master cylinder, start to pump fluid through, start to bleed it, and realize that you have a kink or a clog right here. That will bum you out, trust me, been there. So that's one way to do it. Now when you make a do-it-yourself brake line, you want to do the same principle as that. However, with these, again, the diameter, outside diameter of these brake lines is much bigger, so you're going to have to increase the hole. Now you don't want to make a hole so big, A, that it aesthetically looks ugly, but B, that you interfere with the structural integrity of that piece. You just don't want to, because it's your frame. So think about that. That's why some guys don't want to do this type of stuff, because they don't want to drill holes in their frame, which is totally understandable. So when you get to the point where you've figured out all your wiring, you've got it all plumbed, you've got your frame, your motor, your transmission in, you've got all these funky wires sticking out. Every time you cut, you have to remember that you need to measure twice and the length of it, and literally walk this up to whatever it is you're doing, your master cylinder, your brake light switch, your caliper, whatever it is, and give yourself extra length, especially with these, because if you don't get this right on the first try, if you pinch the inner diameter, because it's still plastic inside inside these steel braided, wrapped by this plastic sheath, and these come in two different kinds. They come in a black nylon, and they come in a clear coated stainless or braided. Every time you mess up with one of these, you are going to take an inch off, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is. So you need to make really sure that you give yourself enough length. If your caliper is here, you need to make sure you give yourself this much, because when you cut that, if you don't do it right, it gets short real fast. I think it all started with a set of tanks, and I was on the road, and I had been given a welder, because I was instructed to stop paying people to do things that I wanted to learn how to do. So in between tour cycles, I would come home, I would drop my bags off in my room, and I would go immediately to the garage. Now, on every tour cycle throughout the country, since I traveled a lot and I had a bus, I became a Craigslist whore. And if I had a day off in Dayton, Ohio, in a couple of days, I did some research, and if I found something I wanted, I contacted them. I would check into my hotel, I would grab an Uber, and I would go see whatever it was. So after each tour cycle we'd get home, I had amassed a buttload of stuff on top of what I had already been buying on eBay. Because by that time, somewhere around the 2014 year, I was really into motorcycles. I had realized that it wasn't my lack of passion and love for music that was diminishing. It was the fact of being on the road in a toxic situation with toxic people in a toxic environment that was not serving me anymore. And it was literally killing my love of why I played drums in the first place when I picked up sticks as a kid. But again, it was my responsibility to act on the action. I couldn't blame anybody for anything. It was like, if I wasn't happy anymore, I don't have to be there. I'm a grown-ass man. But that was easier said than done, because I had literally put so much time, so much effort into the entire idea of leaving Texas and moving to LA and becoming successful, and then it happening, which is, crazy in itself, much less being in that position going, do I actually want to do this anymore? And I didn't. I couldn't find reasons in order for me to want to stick around for the next record, and it became a battle of self-integrity, self-will, and love for music. And that was the real turning point when I realized that I could actually do what other people said I could do and what they did. Because after all, it was brought to my attention that I didn't wake up a professional drummer one day. I worked really hard at it. Well, this is no different. I had to work at it as well. And still have to work at it. But that was the defining moment that I think my love for motorcycles had leveled out with my love of playing music in that situation, in that particular band. So I built a bike out of the tanks that I had requested from Billy, and it was a 7-month process because I was on the road and off the road and on the road, and I would call up every person I knew to ask for help with parts that I didn't understand, welding especially, and bending metal and drive line alignment and all everything. And I built the bike, and it shifted, and it started. It didn't blow up, and it went down the road, and it shifted, and it braked, and I took it over to Bob's Big Boy on a Friday night in Burbank, which is where all the old timers go to bring their hot rods. And a guy liked it and asked me if it was for sale, and I said, no, it's not for sale. And he kind of laughed and said, everything is for sale. And I went inside and had my hamburger and my French fries, and I came back and there was a business card on my bike. And that was a Friday night. On Monday morning I called him, and he asked me what I wanted for it, and I told him, and he said, I'll meet you tomorrow, which was now a Tuesday, at Bob's Big Boy. And he bought my motorcycle. And I remember sitting in the truck with my friend, watching my motorcycle drive away. And I thought to myself, what just happened? And that was the beginning, the real beginning of like, okay. And then that bike led to the purchase of another roller, and then I was asked to do some stuff in Sturgis with Grease Cruising Garage. And I haven't stopped. Also, once you've made this, it doesn't hurt to go in with a rat tail file. I like to use a really thin, fine one because of the fact that the heavier, thicker ones I found still leave lots of jagged little edges on it. And I will just, nice and easy, right on the outside. And all that does is just give you a little bit more reassurance that you are creating a spot and a valley in which that brake line and or wires has a place to sit. And see, so much better already. So when you do that, and you wrap your wires, whatever that is, with your shrink wrap, we're not going to heat this up. So that's your shrink wrap wires. Lays perfectly in that valley. So after you've decided what you're going to run through your frame, whether it be electrical wires, brake line, fittings, anything, any application you want, you can actually do this same process with the master cylinder up top on your handlebars, and you'll see one later on one of my bikes. And you do the same thing with the handlebars, just taking into account that everything is going to run down, not horizontal. So the application can do anything that you want to actually hide wires or brake lines. I have the internal throttle for 2 or 3 of my bikes is the same process. It literally will run through the bar, and then I create a hole in which either the brake line from my master cylinder up top on my handlebars to go through, or the actual throttle cable, or both. In Grace's case, they both come out of the same hole, and all of the edges have that angle valley that I showed you earlier, so that there's no possibility between the turning of the handlebars, the motion of the bike, of any of that stuff getting any kind of burst. So if you have a pipe and you have wires or brake lines or whatever it is, you can use this in any part of the motorcycle within reason. There are some things that I tend to stay away from.
because it gets too crazy. And again, all frames are different. So you may find that when you run your first hole and your last exit hole, there may be something in between there, some sort of block off. Maybe it was a Friday at 5 job and the guy didn't want to weld that properly, so there's a plate. Who knows? My suggestion is when you finally get your entrances and your exits, take a piece of TIG wire or a piece of thick wire, or even whatever you can, to make sure you have entrance and exit. Because you don't want to go through the whole process and then go, oh yeah, it's just a long tube and it should be okay. And then it's not. So that's really, really important, is before you dismantle, make sure that you have entrance and exit and everything is properly, I guess, guided, if you will. A lot of times when you get to the point where you have, let's say you have multiple angles that you're going from the right side of your motorcycle with the master cylinder, and you've got to go through your lowest down rail pipe, across, through the other side, and back to your brake light. Let's just say that. If you don't have TIG wire, and sometimes TIG wire will bound up and it'll bunch. I found that any kind of thick, sturdy wire, like almost like a baling wire, but not with the hooks on it, obviously, the little pricks on it, but something that's thick and rigid that you can guide through there. And this is your best friend. I call them booger pickers. I don't know what they're really called, but that's what the old man called them back at one of the first shop that I worked at, and a pair of tweezers. So what'll happen is if you have, say, this wire that's coming through and you can't quite grab it with, say, some tweezers like that, a booger picker, since it's round, you can actually put it at the bottom, push the wire through, and then see it and grab it. And a lot of times you can grab it depending on the hole size and just hold it underneath and then push it through, because that's exactly what it'll do, just like that. So again, it's a lesson and a practice in patience, because there are going to be curves, there's going to be times when it bunches up. And another thing to do is, if you're trying to come out here, but you're going to have to start somewhere over here, you can literally lead something through there. Take some tape and wrap the two pieces that is your lead, which is what I call a puller. And when you wrap them in a diagonal or horizontal position, and then kind of squeeze the end so it really grabs tight, so that when you're pulling your puller back through, you will pull your lead through, or you will pull your either wire or your brake line through, so that way you know it's coming in one full seamless motion. And if you don't do this right, this is going to break off halfway through, so you have to pull this one out and you have to pull this one out and start all over. So again, take your time. I think that at some point in time there's an interesting thing where I walk out of my laundry room into my garage to dump out the trash or the soapy water that I've done the mopping with, and I see all the stuff in my garage. I see her, I see the latest one that I just built, and all the stuff that I've acquired from that one little single car garage in Burbank, and it trips me out, because there's so many companies that I think in the beginning were excited because I was a successful musician, celebrity / whatever, that was now associated with all these amazing iconic builders, and then kind of stepped into my own light and were willing to give me a lot of their stuff just so I could put my face on. And that's pretty intense, because I spent 27 years wanting to be that guy in Modern Drummer that had this cymbal endorsement and that head endorsement and this stick endorsement and that, and I got all that stuff. And I got the cover of Modern Drummer magazine, which is the holy grail of all magazines as far as drums are concerned. And along with that accolade, my bike that I built in my little garage, which I call Cholula, graced the cover of Cycle Source magazine. Another accolade that, had you told me back in 2006 when I would go down to see Billy to shop and mess around that I would be doing this for a living as a career, it's really crazy, you know, because a lot of people say, wow, you were a successful musician and now you're, I guess, a successful builder. But the truth is I was a bike nut way before I became that guy in that band. And it just goes to show, again, for me on a daily basis, that if I'm not having a good time and if I'm not happy at it, doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter if it's a band that, you know, tours the world and makes tons of money and all that other crap that I thought was so important at one time, or motorcycles. If I'm not happy and enjoying it, I don't want to do it. But it's a good life, you know. I'm a really blessed and grateful man that I can actually do two things in the world that I love. I can play music or I can build motorcycles. Either one when I want to, not because I have to. And that's a pretty awesome thing, you know. So just keep building, keep playing music, keep breathing. Life is for the living.
So that's going to wrap everything up for us here today from Austin, Texas at Providence Worx. Dude, thank you so much for
You're welcome, man. Thanks for coming down. I appreciate it. It was an honor.
Greasing Gears Garage Roadshow. You guys have been following us for the last 4 or 5 years with Greasing Gears Garage out at the rallies and stuff. This is the smaller, more condensed, a little more personal version. We like to go one builder at a time, like we did with X today. Come in and show you where they do their thing. You know, show you some tips and tricks, but in their shop. Real treat for us today and some great information. Make sure you pass this stuff along, share it, tag it, do all the social media hoopla and get it out there. And until next time on Chris with Cycle Source Magazine, go do something in your shop.